about a concept that is basically defined, at least in the academic space, the concept of digital ecosystems and how companies can benefit from building digital ecosystems. Michael?
Thank you very much. Thanks, and it's great to be with you guys. I know that I am competing with good alcohol, a terrific view, a nice house. That is not easy. So let me try to jump in. And for some of you, this is going to be totally pedestrian stuff because you know it. For some of you, perhaps not, although you still know it. Let me speak a little bit about ecosystems, and as Thanos told you, this has been my jam, both on the academic side and on the advisory side. You know, a couple of small provisos, been involved with most of the major shops. I'm an academic advisor to the Boston Consulting Group, and I help them with a new generation of projects there, and I'm the lead advisor of Evolution Limited, a boutique shop that I will refer to because some of the research that I'll be speaking about is the applied stuff there. I have another hat that I will just briefly speak about, which is regulation. I'm the Chief Digital Expert Advisor at the Hellenic Competition Commission, and I'm also occasionally involved as an advisor either in the European Union or occasionally giving Senate testimony or whatever the heck that might be in terms of the competition between ecosystems, which is one of the biggest issues that exist now, and the first time that people in antitrust are asking these big existential questions. But let me start where things start usually when it comes to business, which is follow the money. Why the heck are we speaking about ecosystems? First of all, I had no idea what they were. Thanos says that, you know, yeah, these definitions, and it's true that they gained a fair amount of academic traction, and I started studying it because I had no bloody clue what that means and what it is.
You're at the right
people
place.
were using it and leveraging it, and I was like, I don't understand how they work. Now, if you think about what happened, there's an interesting thing and an interesting twist that many of you may be aware of. And this is the twist in terms of where the market value is concentrated. So if you look at the 5 biggest companies in terms of market capitalization in the world, you're going to see that 2006, you got Exxon, GE, Total, Microsoft, Citi. 2011, what you have, same roster of characters, it's just that China is starting to pick up. You've got Exxon, Apple, PetroChina, Shell, and ICBC. A funny thing happens in 2016, and actually continues not only unabated, but magnified ever since, significantly magnified by COVID. And that is that you have a different set of cast of characters, which are clearly Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook, Alphabet to be technically correct. And it is the same 5 firms, or if you take it global, part of the top 8, you know, top 8 of the top 10, are companies which, and here's the interesting twist, they are not companies that are tech companies. What I would suggest is that technology is the thin edge of the wedge, and the way they are able to leverage value to get the money that they get is that they build ecosystems and they are redefining traditional sectors. It is not the technology sector itself. Technology is a tool, and it is the tool that you're using to change profitability around. Now, with BCG, we got all of the juniors and we said, okay, let's take all of the big reports of all the big companies. And we looked at any company that is over 10 billion or 20 billion in terms of market cap, and among a number of other things, we're like, who mentions or does not mention in their K10s and their quarterly reports the word ecosystems? And there's a very interesting irregularity that we found, which is that the ones that did mention ecosystems had a significantly higher cumulative annual growth rate. Now, I'm an academic, don't just consult. So basically, I know causation can go the other way. So it could be that rich people have fancy language, and this is the fancy language of rich people, perhaps. And there's a bit of it there too. But it tells us there is a thing there. There is something that we need to start digging and finding out what's going on. The second thing that was interesting was the significant increase in the incidence and the number of times where you see the word ecosystem show up in the annual reports. And you see that between 2008 and 2017, it has grown up 13-fold. So this starts mattering, and does not only matter for the small firms, it also matters for the large firms who are starting to notice, and that there is a positive association in terms of growth between the two. Now, you open any of the big consultancies, and they all say pretty much the same thing. Look, industry boundaries are being dissolved, and they are being replaced by ecosystems. And there's a heck of a lot of good reason before that. And it's not just technology. As a matter of fact, technology is a very small part of it. If you think about the real cause behind it, it is that the industry boundaries are going down primarily because of deregulation. We used to have, and in Greece we still have, clearly delineated structures which you need to be allowed to do stuff, but we're now getting rid of them. And people want to have convenience, and they want to have different packages which make sense. And we'll start saying, you know what, if we started designing the world, this is not the way that we would design it. And we're starting to repackage it on this basis. Now, for those of you who still are not entirely sure, I'm giving some of the archaeological evidence in terms of ecosystems. This is an email of a leader who got it, but got it about 2 years too late. And it's an email of Stephen Elop from his sinking ship as he was looking at the bridge going underwater, saying that the battle of devices has now become a war of ecosystems, where ecosystems include not only the hardware and software, but developers, applications, e-commerce, advertising, search, location-based services, and the rest. Our competitors are taking a market share with devices, they're taking a market share with an entire ecosystem, which means we're going to have to decide how we either build, catalyze, or join an ecosystem after he had totally screwed up with over and other ecosystems that he was trying to join. Yeah, but it at least sounded like his last effort to rally the troops. And it shows that we have a qualitative shift in terms of the way the competition happens. Now, people are usually thinking about ecosystems and they're like, yeah, we kind of know what it is. All the big tech firms do that, don't they? And an ecosystem is something that requires a number of things to work together. And here's the interesting thing. It also involves a number of different firms that need to collaborate. Now, let me try to demystify it. And let me try to tell you what I think are a couple of important changes that are happening, that are changing the way ecosystems work. You could say, okay, things working together. Tea leaves, paper bag, hot water. Are we going to be speaking about the tea ecosystem? No, it's stupid. Okay, tea ecosystem is stupid. But, exhibit number 2, something that you will have seen in the hotel rooms that you have stayed in, or perhaps even some of your houses. Nespresso. What is Nespresso? Nespresso is a system to make espresso without making the mess in the kitchen counter that drives my wife crazy every morning as I try to make a coffee. It stores them in a capsule, they are easy to use, you don't need to know how to make it, you just put it there, you do plonk, and then a nice espresso, well, kind of nice, not very good, kind of nice espresso with crema comes out, and then you can have it. Simple. Remember that. Important. Simple solves a problem for the individual. We'll return to that in a moment. The other thing that happens, though, is that Nespresso doesn't do everything itself. Now, here's the interesting thing. Nespresso has created an ecosystem of complementers. They work together. Why? I'll tell you why. These capsules only work with particular machines that are made to work with capsules. Think about the difference between this and tea. Any tea bag works with any cup and any boiled water. An espresso capsule only works with a co-specialized machine. They have patents not only for the capsule, actually there's a big story about the IP of Nespresso, they also have patents in terms of the way the machine interfaces with them. A generic complementarity, to put it academically, has been turned into a specific complementarity. Things are made to fit together in a specific way. What does that allow Nespresso to do? Nespresso, Nestlé, basically now can say, tell you what, I'm going to go and I'm going to work with a few companies. I'm going to find Jura, I'm going to find Krups, I'm going to find Galesi, and I'm going to tell them, you know what, you will come and you will create the machines. Now, I may not be a nasty firm like Apple, I'm not going to take 30%, I'm not going to take anything, because I make enough money on the coffee anyway. But I'm going to choose the people that make it. Now, if you think about the way that we organize now, this is new. Why? In the past, you used to do things in either of 2 ways. You either did them yourself, you have your employees, you have your units, they produce the machines, you perhaps put them together, or you have a supply chain. You just go to a supplier, you say white label mate, don't say it's yours, I'm going to pretend it's mine, or perhaps we do some co-branding, but it's an agreement. Now, the way that ecosystems work is different. And the way they work is that there is someone, the orchestrator, that says, tell you what, there are going to be some rules. These rules will say who's in and who's out. And I'm going to say, I will choose 4 people to go in, and they need to be approved. Or I will allow everyone to come in because I like variety, because customers like variety. After that, there are going to be the rules on how we divide income. I'm going to say, you give me 30%, I'm Apple, I've got a lot of power. Or I'm Nestlé. I don't want to do that because otherwise I will be hurting my possibility of growing. So you see, ecosystems have emerged because we now start having these co-specializations that can be not just generic, but also specific. And here's where the digital stuff becomes important. It is extremely easy in digital worlds where most of you inhabit to make things that are specific. You design the APIs. You design whether things are open or closed. You can design your interfaces. You have a much greater opportunity of structuring the world when it comes to a digital environment than you would in a physical environment. Why do we see then this rise, this growth in terms of these ecosystems? Because we can do lots of stuff. Because we are designers who now are able to say, tell you what, I'm going to do that, and I'll leverage these other people, and I will organize them in a way that I'm going to be able to benefit the stuff that I'm doing as well. The other thing that's happening is that as we see products around us, we see the scope of these products increasing vastly. If you think about the products that we're looking at, your smartphones, your autonomous cars, they are starting to span a much greater part of the value-adding process than the products of yesteryear. What does that mean? It means that the capabilities, the competencies that are being developed and that are being put together need to be integrated. And what's interesting is they need to be integrated in ways that manage all of these interdependencies. You can't just do that by standards. You need someone who says, okay, all right, I see what these interdependencies are. I'm going to be boss here. I'm going to tell you how we're going to put it together in order to have a package that works. Which means that there is a role for these people who orchestrate ecosystems in order to add value. Then we start going to consumers and what consumers do. And I'm sure that this picture is going to be entirely alien to you, but I still have not managed to have a robust framework for mobile phone use with my wife in bed. Please tell me if you have some solid ideas. Now the problem is that not only do we have these devices that are the interface between us and the world, we're also bloody lazy. And what technology does is it leverages our laziness. We were forced to not be lazy, and now we're like, oh, peace, I can be lazy, I love it. Now, 4 years ago, a guy I really liked, Dick Taylor, won the Nobel Prize, and the day that he won the Nobel Prize, I went to search Mr. Google, and I asked Mr. Google what exactly were his 2 best quotes. And I love them because together they give you a sense of what the problem is, including the problem of power of ecosystems. He said that the combination of loss aversion with mindless choosing implies that if an option is designated as a default, it'll attract a large market share, and also that the choice architect has a responsibility for organizing the context in which people make decisions. Now you understand Alexa, now you understand the whole bloody fight between all the big tech and why it is that they gain so much power, because we would very much like to give it to them because we are fundamentally lazy when we make these choices and we rely on default because that is what human psychology is like. And what you see with these platforms and ecosystems is that you have the emergence of these new intermediaries, and now we come to another thing, not too much time to speak about it today, which is super apps, which are the apps that are trying to mediate between you and the rest of the environment. As a matter of fact, you can see that in transport as well, where the mediation only in terms of, say, ride-hailing is proving to be rather weak. Sometimes you can just about make the economics work, but as we have seen by companies like Grab and Gojek in Southeast Asia, it is the creation of this package that then allows you to have a broader set of needs that makes you sticky, that increases your power. That creates also this idea of a bottleneck. And exhibit A there is the comparison between one of the companies that is lauded usually in terms of some of its value proposition in the hotel world, the Groupe Accor that made, before the pandemic, 5.8 billion euros of profit with 500,000 employees, as opposed to Booking.com that made more profit with 8,000 employees. Now, ecosystems have got a couple of subtleties, and that's where actually the regulators themselves are even more confused as they're trying to figure out what the heck they're looking at. But thankfully, they do recognize that they are confused. Now, when we speak about ecosystems, it's a bit complicated because we've got two different things, two different if related dimensions that are going together. One of them are the multi-product ecosystems. Multi-product ecosystems are the bundles of things that the consumers consume because they like them, because it's easy, or because you have one point of access and you are able to create value from it. So if you think about Apple, it is the fact that it integrates search and music and videos and internet browsing and cameras and messaging and health tracking and maps and gaming. The second thing is what I told you a moment ago, which is the multi-actor ecosystem, i.e. that within each of these verticals, you're like, I'm not going to do everything. I'm not going to be employing people, I'm not going to be using a supply chain, but I will also be using, in the vertical and multi-actor ecosystem, telling people, hey people, either you guys come up with cool new ideas, app creators who can create all of that good stuff because you're not really good at doing innovation, and also you don't care about that innovation because that's not your real money, but it'll drive the downstream use, and you want to create this ecosystem of connected parties. And that's where the two get connected. Why? Because if you have companies that have these broad salamis of these combined things that are adding value, they gain more power over their complementers. And they become stronger in being able to potentially squeeze them in terms of the people that work in each part of the value-adding process. And that's one of the things that right now we're trying, a couple of us are trying to help the European Commission understand in terms of the new implementations of the Digital Markets Act, which is supposed to, partly at least, compensate for that. I think that we have a bit more chance with the FTC right now. Anyway, you see that in Apple, you see that in Google, you see that with all the big firms. And I think that this idea of the ecosystems being primarily multi-product is something that is even more visible when you look in Southeast Asia. And that is one of the slides that I got for the presentation the first time Ant Financial went to get some proper amount of money, which was in 2016, where it got 4.5 billion. It's supposed to be worth 130. Last time they tried to get it, but they didn't because they fell out with the central, with the leadership of the Communist Party. But that's another rather entertaining, very Chinese idea. But what they do is that they say very explicitly that we want to be in the middle of it. The Chinese call it, whichever company you say, they speak of consumption scenarios, which is an interesting way in which these guys put it. Now, I spoke of Ant Financial, and I suspect most people in this room know it, but just so that I calibrate, can I see a show of hands for people who knows Ant Financial? Wow, about a third of the room does. I expect that this particular crowd would have a much bigger knowledge of it. Who is Ant Financial? Well, let me tell you who these people are. Ant Financial was part of the Alibaba group. Alibaba was a combination of all of these marketplaces, B2C, B2C, they've got different names, Tmall and Taobao and the rest of them that are all put together in order to capture the Chinese market. And what they needed is to find some way of paying, because China was a very low trust economy. And they needed someone to do essentially an escrow account, and Western Union was literally slipping in on its rear end and wouldn't really budge. And they're like, oh, it's a great opportunity, we're going to get the money, and once the other side says, yeah, these are the goods, we'll release it, and this way at least we will have a secure system which will help the marketplace and will make it work. And then they started understanding how to certify people in a country that had very little information about that, and they said, hey, that actually is rather cool. So starting with the knowledge and the information access they got, they started moving in this multi-product ecosystem, because they said, why are we stopping here? We're the people who have the really good information. So now, not only will we have 450 million people using payment, that's 2006 figures, now it's well over a billion, they had 152 million people in wealth management. Anyone who's been in a bank can understand what that means. They had 3 million SME loans, 280 million people who had used their insurance and 130 million people who used their credit reference. And what they did is that they tried to ensure that they can lock them in. And the other big competitor tried to have slightly better information. That's Ping An, which was an insurance firm that then combined with health service provision in order to create the rival. Now, if you think that this is only Asia, this is only tech, think again. Here's a slide from another company I work with, Sberbank. Actually, not Sberbank, Sber. Sberbank used to be Putin's favorite bank. Well, anyone who's successful in Russia clearly needs to be favorite of Putin, but beyond doing that and beyond being the biggest and most successful of the banks in Russia, they realized at the level of the board that banking is starting to be very boring. What we need to do is to create an ecosystem, and we will even take the word bank out. And we will try to put the customer in the middle, and we are going to be involved in Sber billing, Sber business ID, data exchange, connect, Sber NLP, Sber service, CS, Sber cloud, Sber CRM, Sber loyalty, Sber everything. So they are trying to find new ways from which they will expand and connect, doing a combination of both of the types of ecosystems that I mentioned in order to be successful. To give you an example of how this is disrupting traditional sectors, consider telco. Consider what is happening, for instance, in India, where you've got Reliance Jio, which is a company that started as a local telco producer, doing a very similar thing. And it's now moving in anywhere from content to news, and again, an interesting question of the balance. What do you do yourself? To what are you the portal connecting with other firms? Conversely, you go a bit further east and you go to Japan and you see Rakuten. What is Rakuten? Fancy, sells malls and shops. And what Rakuten is doing is creating a 5G service rollout plan because they decided they themselves need to change their footprint. And you are seeing some of the more forward-looking retailers. You see Majid Al Futtaim Ventures in the GCC trying to connect the link between the digital and the physical. You see Rakuten trying to move into the space of communication in order to enhance the possibility of moving in that area. And of course, that is leading to a huge amount of problems. I could have chosen any slide that is saying, oh my God, the big tech are becoming really dangerous. There was lots of work there. But I guess that for those of us who are not looking at competition, I'll mention about that in just a moment, there's good news and bad news. And the good news is that if you take a step back and you start looking at ecosystems, and you're like, oh yeah, I heard about that. Ecosystems are based on network externalities. What are network externalities? Network externalities means that people like other people going in. You'd be a sad chap if you had the only fax machine in the world, so the more people have fax machines, the more valuable your fax machine. Turns out that that's a gross oversimplification, that network effects are much more limited than people think, that there are direct and indirect ones, and people tend to invest in them too much in the beginning and generally fall flat on their face. There's another thing that is really interesting when it comes to ecosystems, which is good because it means that being early or having initial scale isn't really cutting it. Now, there's a lot of work, and as I mentioned, together with the chairman of the Hellenic Competition Commission, I'm involved in a number of these discussions in terms of how do we regulate them, and I do think that this is a huge issue. We're right now speaking, just to give you a bit of a glimpse, and those of you interested, there are some white papers that we have written in the Evolution Limited site, but to give you a glimpse of one of the most recent ones, we're right now thinking about gatekeepers and the power that particular firms have as gatekeepers, which we've done a dreadful job in the EU of classifying only on the basis of volume. But suffice it to simply park it and then say there's a huge agenda that we as a society have to decide. And if you saw the recent announcements of the earnings of big tech, you will see that that is consistent with the worst fears. They are growing very, very healthily, not just market cap, but also the earnings, which raise interesting questions in terms of the power of big tech that is continuing to enter into acquisitions. I know with some of this group, it's great because you would love to be acquired in a stupid amount of money and then get a wonderful yacht and get the heck out of there, but society still has to contend with the problem that that entails. Let me now shift into strategy, because I've told you, I hopefully have convinced you that this stuff matters and we need to deal with it. The question is, what do we do to deal with it? Well, based on not just the research, but also on some projects that we did with Asian big techs, with big European companies and others, and that's the Evolution Limited stuff, the advisory hat that I'm on, we've created a 7-step framework to think about how do you define what you do, whether you want to be running your own ecosystem or you want to think about how you are complementing others' ecosystems. And I think, no time to present it, but just to give you a bit of a flavor, the first two is trying to figure out what is the scope of the multi-product ecosystem and do an analysis of what the competitive landscape at the level of the customer value proposition is, and then for the areas that you decide to have a multi-actor ecosystem, you try to identify a few critical choices. Now, if you look at the full deck, clearly, like any of the advisory stuff, you're like, oh, wonderful, because you've got to look at all these things and put them together and make them relevant and make them operational and the rest of it. So I'm not going to bore you with it. Might be able to send you a copy of the deck, but I would like to give you some example in terms of the things that you do as you're thinking about what your positioning is. Some of the analysis that you do is inside out, other analysis is outside in. You look at the world and you look at yourself. Let me give you an example of the inside out work that we did with Enel. Enel is the venerable Italian energy company, and it's expanded geographically. It's moved into a number of other geographies. It loves renewables. It's one of the fast growing ones, but it does other things too. And what happened is that Venturini, the global CEO, has made Starace, the guy that used to run the renewables, leading NLX, which is the exciting bit of Enel. And they're like, okay, what do we do? Well, the question is, let's look at what we have and let's see how we can leverage it. Now, one of the things that Enel has is lampposts. A lot of lampposts. It's got about 3 million lampposts. And you might say, what the heck do you do with a lamppost? Well, this is a very important part of your relationship with the municipalities. And it turns out that the electricity bill of municipalities is a significant part of the budget that they actually get. Together with cleaning, these are the two big expenses generally. Now, what they said is, okay, well, since we've got them, let's think about these as an anchor and not think only about them as something that sells you electricity, but first of all, I think we coined the B to P to V, business to politicians to voters. And let's think about what it is that the voters would like, so that the politicians are going to be excited with, so that the business is going to get some more business. Well, let's offer them some more cool stuff. And what could that be? Well, you use these because you already have the electricity connected to that to do full electric buildings, architectural lighting, urban advertising, lighting control, adaptive lighting, smart city. You connect it to all the free European money that's going around. You're like, woohoo, that's going to work well. And on top of it, you're not going to do it all yourself, so it's not just you broadening up the scope, but you're also bringing the complementers in terms of the multi-actor ecosystem in order to be able to leverage the energy that the other guys have. And Alex also said, all right, well, let me rethink what my value proposition for the home is. Some of you may have seen, may even own part of Google's venture, one of the ventures it bought called Nest, which manages the energy consumption and the rest of it in your home and knows when your car is in driving distance, so it cools it or it warms it. They said, we will create the brain that manages the functions that allows the customer to be happy so that they both stick with us and that we get some ancillary revenue, and we'll work with Amazon as a partner in order to be able to leverage the fact that they don't have a solution developed for this quite yet. So they have comics that you can find in Amazon right now. Now, the other thing that you need to do is that you need to combine not only the understanding of what you have, but also what the consumer wants. Now, for that, you again need to be a little bit more creative. You think about the customer, and you think about how you can package something that's going to make the customer stick in your ecosystem. And I think the nicest tale there is the tale of the traditional giant. It's Alibaba in the areas of trading in China, and the success. And the success of Pinduoduo. Pinduoduo is this unlikely number 3 that totally overshadowed JD.com, that was the stable #2 competitor to Alibaba. How did they do it? Well, these are the people who like gaming. And what they say, we're going to do a couple of different things. We will bring you into trading via gaming. And we will leverage our games like Orchard Duo, and we're going to make gaming social. You will bundle together, you will make purchases, you're going to get some gaming rewards, and also by bringing more people on the platform, we're going to give you these great Orchard, which of course are ridiculous and are free, and you've got them there and you can get people excited, so that you make gaming both a social experience. It is gamified, which for a huge part of the slightly younger people in China is very important, and their demographics also support it. And you are changing the nature of the interaction in the platform itself. And then you start thinking about how can we do that? How can we calibrate it? One of the things that we did working with one of the most interesting telcos with Manish Wenger and MásMóvil, which is the small Spanish telco that's growing quite fast. We said, okay, what we are going to do is something that will be appealing to a specific group. That's another really interesting thing that you can do with ecosystems. You can start really focusing on the holistic needs of particular groups. A moment ago, when we're looking at healthcare, I mentioned, for instance, Omada, which is why I like the presentation that you did in terms of healthcare. So what these guys are doing, they're saying, you're diabetic, I'll manage you end to end, and I'll be able to ensure that I cover all your needs. What Maimi, a former colleague of René in McKinsey, who then went on to become the CEO of MásMóvil, did, is he said, okay, why don't we take the elderly population? I can tell you I'd love something like this in Greece where my mother lives. We'll do a big square like that, and it's going to have doctor, weather, and other sort of simple things. You're going to have an obtrusive little bracelet, so if someone falls, the doctor is immediately notified. And you already have the relationship of trust, so you can start creating a focused value proposition for particular people in particular areas. So when you think about these ecosystems, they don't necessarily need to span everything. They can be a portfolio of activities that are really well attuned in order to address the needs that you have. You can then start looking at the analytics. You're like, oh, so when it has to do with that ecosystem, you either create one, which is a tabula rasa view, or you have the head-on competition. There's an ecosystem, I'm going to fight it, and make sure that I'm going to out-compete it, Taxi versus Uber. You can then have other things like unbundling. If you think about the growth of companies like Tinder, they essentially took part of what was Craigslist or part of what was part of a big, broad offering, and they created a nice, packaged, customized, focused bit that was able to schlep things off. And you see it happening in tech anytime, or you can have enveloping that covers it all together. Now, in ecosystems, though, there's also a number of misperceptions which are even more relevant in big firms. The first of them is the LeBron James paradox. Now, you may know LeBron James, one of the best basketball players alive, and he's also particularly good in shooting from beyond 7 meters. The problem is in the airport literature style analysis that you look at ecosystems, people say, look at Facebook and look at Google. They have their ecosystem and they orchestrate it. You should be like Facebook and Google. It's like having your son and then say, look at LeBron James. He is a great basketball player and shoots from 7 meters. You should shoot from 7 meters. It's like, no. You have causality wrong. When you have the ability of LeBron James, you can shoot from 7 meters. Just telling a random firm, try to build your own ecosystem, when they are utterly incapable of doing it, you will have thought of it. You will have the companies that try to do, apologies, I have worked with the leadership of Vodafone, and I am fully ready to support, the crappy stuff that was happening in Vodafone in more than one occasion. But you have companies like, not just Vodafone, most of the telcos, frankly, what they're saying, the same thing here, they tried, they failed. But the companies that are trying to do that, perhaps they might even have the possibility of doing that, but they either have the wrong strategy or they have the wrong execution, which then brings you to the other question, what the heck do you do? Well, you need to think about your role. You may want to not just be an orchestrator, but be a partner or be a complementer, the different profiles. You need to make a clear strategic choice of what makes sense and under what circumstances, rather than saying, woo, ecosystems, it's just free money, so I'll be able to use it. And also, you need to remember that you need to fight for your complementers because they're your partners, not just your suppliers. And that brings me to the second big problem that I've seen, especially with the established firms, which is that there is a slight misunderstanding in terms of ecosystems. People mess up a particular letter, the letter C and the letter G. It's an ecosystem. I remember I was working with one of the venerable Swiss insurers, and we were speaking about their ecosystem, and I'm like, okay, can we have someone who's going to draw it together? So, the exercise went as such. It is the company in the middle, it is big tech that is somewhere in the periphery, and then the customers a bit further off, and they didn't even think about the complementers that they needed. And the problem is that we think that the world revolves around us, when the whole bloody point of ecosystem is that the world revolves around whatever is going to make a lazy customer happy because their needs are being covered before they even know it, hence the value of AI. Now, there's a lot of sort of more detail there because ecosystems can be multi-local, national, multinational, or global, and we often think about the global ones, a very small part. Most of them are battles fought city by city, country by country, region by region when it comes to regulation. There are different tools that you can use, financial, not financial, and user focused or channel focused when it comes to what you give them. And then I think that it is important to have a clear sense, which is why we're so recommending that we have a structured approach to trying to think about what are the upsides, why the heck we are in this game, what are we looking for? Are we looking for cross-selling, for cost reduction, from leveraging the data, and so on and so forth, and what are the downsides? And the reason that this is important is that you need to think about some KPIs. You need to start thinking about what the implications are for your own organization. I remember I was speaking with Jonathan Larson. He's the Chief Innovation Officer of Ping An, which has created one of the best ecosystems in health. And I was like, okay, so what do you think is the secret sauce of Ping An? Even in the Chinese context, you guys have been better. And he's like, my view is that it comes down to the focus of the CFO. I'm like, what? He's like, the CFO spends 50% of their time thinking about KPIs for the new businesses. And I'll challenge you to think one CFO that even bothers to think about the KPIs in terms of the new businesses. It is beneath them. They think about the sexy stuff, about the financing, about the ways that they're going to be increasing the different metrics that they get. And I think that the relentless focus that combines finance with technology is a huge part of being able to not just walk the walk, but also, talk the talk, but also walk the talk as well. And you need to think about how you're going to be able to change things inside. So this is just an idea of what this framework is, and as I mentioned, you can take a look at that in our website because the ecosystem development framework is out there, and some academic papers, whether in the artificial intelligence ecosystem, which I did with a managing director of the Henderson Institute, BCG School of Leadership arm, and a friend and professor in the HZ. And also, speaking of healthcare, some work with a chief strategy officer and chief innovation officer and the head of M&A for Philips, which is trying to figure out what its future is, having shed all of its traditional assets, having focused now on healthcare, and thinking about how it can create digital healthcare platforms, which is going to be absolutely critical for its future. I will also say, just giving a bit of a fact to Vicky, that one of the things that we're now doing in Evolution is beyond the advisory that we've done, which has traditionally been more with established firms, but partly because they can afford our fees, is to move into the so what in terms of implementation. And it's going to be exciting to see how the technology solution in terms of building ecosystems that Grapevine is developing to complement the value proposition with the other stuff will actually evolve, and we're working on this. And I'm excited to see some of the other ventures that are emerging and what may become of that. And just to give credit to some of the people that were involved in this report. One of them is here, and it's René Langen, who's a senior advisor, and He used to be a former partner in, senior partner in McKinsey and co-run TNT in Europe and the chief strategy officer of OPAP. And my friend Martin Brunsko, who is, in terms of the investment member of the investment committee of the EIC, former research and innovation minister of Slovakia and head of Europe for the World Economic Forum, or the chap who was just calling a moment ago, who's Dan Gould, the former CTO of Tinder, because the idea is that we'd like to bring people in and combine their expertise on an ad hoc basis. And as you can see, we have primarily worked with bigger companies rather than smaller ones for pragmatic reasons, but we are increasingly looking at the entrepreneurial space, because I think that what is interesting is not only thinking about the advisory in terms of direction, but also how things will actually run and how the technologies that are embedded in them can deliver value for companies as one package between the advisory and the entrepreneurial, and also because it's kind of hard to think about new ventures. Now, let me just wrap that up with some things that are a bit more applied for the people who are saying what are the things that I would come down to what to do or what not to do when building your ecosystem. In terms of what to do, the first is usual strategy stuff. Prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. Choose battlefields, anchors, what you're going to be drawing on, and the complementers to the list, which quite often becomes a very loose idea. You need to have a clear value proposition when it comes to the complementers you pick. Be customer obsessed in terms of the jobs to be done, what customers want, or what you might be able to package them as one thing. Co-creating value by strategic partnerships, which is not as easy as it sounds, because people are used to RFPs or IFQs or whatever. Have a game plan, know why you're in it and what you're doing, and measure success and reward it, which is the KPI and the focus on being able to create something of value add. What not to do, what quite often happens. Suffer delusions of grandeur, thinking that you can do it all. Building ecosystems, assuming that absolutely everyone is going to follow you because you're cool. Trying to offer it all without looking at customer choice. Treating your partners as suppliers because you squeeze rather than co-creating, and rush because unfortunately ecosystems take time. It means that you're putting things out there and you need to be able to try them out. And finally, I think that what we have also seen in organizations is that you need to rethink what organization structures are necessary to support these ecosystems. To give you an example of some work we did with VCG with Volkswagen, the problem with Volkswagen is that it was well structured for some simple JVs. When it comes right now to the ecosystem in terms of mobility, it realized that it shifted from simple JVs, partner to partner in different geographies or for different product lines, to things that span 6 industries, 5 continents, something like 11 countries, and 42 to 50-some partners at the time. What you see is that there are interesting strategic links. So not just that you need to think about it organizationally, but there is a lot of activity in choosing how you're going to be doing the alliances, the M&A, and the build-up to that. It's an important part of strategy. And then you see companies like Hire that is turning itself downside up, saying, you know what I want to do is I want to change my own structure to be more responsive. And Ruimin Zhang, the CEO of Hire, has turned Hire in a company that is run by 400 different separate and independent ecosystem micro-enterprise communities. Because he's like, I'm not going to be able to do it all centrally. I want to decentralize the decision making, and I'm going to be measuring the ecosystem revenue, because your fridge will be ordering milk, and I don't want Jack Ma to be the one who benefits from it, and I want you guys to go out in the field and be able to do it. So I think that leaves an interesting agenda for change, and also you need to continue having your drinks. Thank you very much. It's been fun speaking to you.